followed her to the station, her suitcase in my hand. Yes, and I followed her to the station, her suitcase in my hand. Well, it's hard to tell when all your love's in vain. All my love's in vain. The train pulled into the station. I looked her in the eye. When the train pulled into the station, I looked her in the eye. Well, I was lonesome myself, so lonesome I could not help but cry. All my love's in vain. The station with two lights on behind. Yes, and the train left the station, ooh, with two lights on behind. Well, the blue light was my blues, and the red light was my mind. All my love's in vain.
Hey there, I'm Gareth Paul and welcome to this guitar lesson video. Today we're going to learn one of the great blues songs, Love in Vain, in the style of Robert Johnson. Our version is not exactly like Robert Johnson, but it's pretty darn close. The song is super fun to play, and once you get it, it's surprisingly easy. All you need is your guitar, your fingers, and a suitcase full of blues. Let's get started. So in this section, I'm going to provide you a few general thoughts about Robert Johnson's guitar playing, and then we're going to get into how to play the bass line for Love in Vain. So Robert Johnson plays this song in standard tuning without using the slide. Generally, when he does not use the slide, he plays a standard tuning, and then he uses open tuning with the slide. On the recording, this is pretty close to take one from the complete Robert Johnson. On that recording, his guitar is tuned down about a half step. He's playing out of A position, which is what we're doing today. After you learn it, if you want to play along with him, you will have to tune your guitar down about a half step. I'm tuned to standard tuning 440, E, A, D, G, B, E. So the first thing that I think is really cool about Robert Johnson's playing is that oftentimes it sounds like there's more than one guitar playing at the same time. And the way he achieves this, at least the way I like to think about it, is you kind of want to mentally divide your guitar into two halves. Your bottom three strings are going to be your rhythm section, your bass and drums, if you will, while your top three strings are going to be more of a rhythm guitar or even a lead guitar voice. And the way that he gets the two halves of the guitar to kind of sound different is through this damping technique. He's almost always damping his bass strings and letting the top three strings ring out. And so the way you achieve this is by muting the guitar with your palm, and this is just something you kind of have to feel out on your own, how your own anatomy works, the size of your hands, all that kind of thing, but you essentially want to damp the bottom 3 strings while letting the top 3 strings ring out. Takes a little trial and error, a little practice to get it. And so the bottom 3 strings are almost always played with the thumb. That's again our rhythm section, our bass and drums. The top 3 strings, for this song, I don't always stick to this, but you can kind of assign a finger to a string. Your first finger is going to play your G string. Your second finger, your right hand middle finger is going to play your B string, and your right hand index finger is going to play your E string. Again, I don't always stick to that slavishly, but as a general rule of thumb, it helps. So that's the first thing, is just to get that thumping bass. You really want a very muted, very percussive sound on your bass. So for this song, the bass line is super, super easy. If you need a little reminder on the 12-bar blues progression, I'm going to put up a chart right here for a few seconds. So that's your standard 12-bar blues in the key of A. And the only bass notes we're going to play are an A, an E, and a D. And so I'm going to play it one time through for you, just the bass. And I'm going to put the chart back up when I do that. I'm going to go ahead and finger these chord shapes because I think it's just good to get in the habit of playing the chord shapes while you play the bass, because you're really not going to be playing the bass by itself. You're going to be adding these chord shapes on top. So let's talk briefly about that before I play through the chord progression on the bass. So for the A or the A7, this is the voicing I'm using. It's very similar to your kind of standard cowboy chord for A, but I'm adding a 7th on top. So what I'm doing is I'm barring across my 2nd fret, and then I'm putting my 2nd finger on this G natural on my high E string. Sometimes we're going to play that, other times we're going to do this. All I've done is move my pinky up to the 5th fret. So those are the 2 voicings you're going to need for your A major or your A7. For the D7, we're going to play a chord you probably know. It's just this very common D7 chord shape. There's another voicing of the D7 I'll show you when we get there. But when I play the bass line, play the rhythm, I'm just going to put my fingers here for now. On the E7, there's also a couple of E7s we're going to play in this song. But generally when I'm playing the rhythm, I'm playing this. I'm just taking my D7 chord shape and I'm moving it up a whole step to make it an E7, and I'm playing my bottom string open. Sounds like that. So again, the 3 chord shapes are my A, open A in the bass, this A7 or A major, my D7, open D string, the top 3 strings playing this voicing, my E7 right there, bottom E string open, muted, and my top 3 strings, same chord shape as my D7. Okay, so I'll play the chord progression one time through, just keeping it super simple. I'm just going to play this very simple 4 on the floor bass pattern with my thumb while I'm damping the strings. And I'm going to put the chord progression up while I do it. I'm going to start my metronome at about 80 beats per minute. It's about where I perform the song at the beginning of this video. So here's all the way through, just playing the bass line while fingering the chord shapes, just to get in the habit of doing that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Going to D. Back to A. Going to E7, D7, A, and one measure of E. Back to the top right there. That's all Robert Johnson is doing on the bass. It sounds super awesome. It's super easy once you get the feel for damping with your palm. Okay, let's get into that intro for Love in Vain. I'll play it for you one time and then I'll show you what I'm doing. 1, 2. And that would be the top of the song right there. So we're starting out on, it's actually an A7 chord shape. It's the same chord voicing you already know. It's your D7 chord voicing. We've got our A on the G string, our C natural on the B string, and an F sharp. On the E string, we're just moving the whole thing up to the 9th fret. And if you were going to play a bass with that, you play your open A. Sounds like that. So we've got our E on the G string, we've got a G natural on the B string, and a C sharp here on the E string. On the recording, Robert Johnson is not playing any bass during that part. I think it sounds really cool to hold out the bass until you get to this lick. So that's what we're gonna do, and it's a little bit hard to hear, but I think he's actually only playing the top 2 strings of the guitar. It's really no more trouble to play 3 strings, so that's what I did. And so the first thing sounds like this. Take note that it actually starts on beat 3 of a measure. So if you're playing with other people and you want to count in, it'll be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And that's the first lick of the intro. You can see that I'm keeping to what I talked about earlier with assigning a finger per string. Just kind of strumming it upwards like that. One more time. 1, 2. So just keeping the same chord shape, moving it down a half step. So that's the first gesture of the intro. The second, it's a little hard to play the rhythm right if I don't play it in context, so I'm going to play the beginning and go into the second part. 1, 2. So this is a really common, very cool blues lick. Robert Johnson uses it a lot, as do a ton of other guitar players. We've got our pinky on the E, I'm on an A note on this high E string. I've got my third finger, my left hand ring finger on a G natural, and then I'm just moving the G natural down chromatically, down to E. With both notes, it sounds like that. I am playing the G string with my thumb, and I'm palm muting, and I'm letting the top string ring out. So just playing the notes, not on the right rhythm, it sounds like that. The rhythm is pretty cool. Takes a little practice. One more time. I'm kind of cheating on my string assignments here. I'm actually playing my E string with my middle finger on my right hand. It's a little bit stronger, so I tend to use it if it's available. So the first 2 parts of the intro. 1, 2. You can change up the rhythm on that lick if you want. Robert Johnson does that. He plays it differently on a lot of his songs, same notes but in a different rhythm, and you can do the same thing. I think what I'm doing is pretty close to what he does on the recording of Love in Vain. So first 2 parts one more time of the intro. 1, 2. And then the last thing is we're playing an E7, and on the recording I hear a G sharp on top. It's a little hard to hear what the note is right below that, but a D works really, really well. If you know a little bit of music theory, you know on a dominant chord, an A7 chord for example, the most important notes other than the bass are the chord 3rd and the chord 7th. So we've got the chord 3rd, that's our G sharp on the high E string. We've got our chord 7th, the D natural, on the B string. I'm adding a little open E before I get there. That's the basic lick. Hitting those two bass notes, an open E and stop to the second fret with my first finger, and then letting these top two strings ring out. So the whole intro, 1, 2. And we'll be at the top. One more time. 1, 2. And that is the intro for Love in Vain. Okay, let's get into the main part of the song. This is super fun because we kind of have to combine three things together. We're going to have our thumping bass with our thumb on the bottom three strings with the palm muting, 4 on the floor. Then we're going to add some chord shapes on top and a few little lead guitar licks. I'm going to show you all that right now. So in my performance of this at the beginning of this video, I essentially do the same thing every time through the form. I simplify it a little bit when I do the mandolin solo, but while I'm singing, I play the same licks in the same spot every time. You can do that, or even better, you can vary it. I definitely encourage you to come up with your own little licks based off of what I show you and kind of vary it as you play. I certainly would do that if I was actually performing this song. So, I'm going to play the whole thing one time through with my metronome, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm going to stop when we get to the turnaround, because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And I'm going to put the chord chart up again while I play. 1, 2, 3, 4. I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Yes, and I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Well, it's hard to tell, when all your love's in vain. And right there we will get to the turnaround. I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay. So we start off on our A chord. We're actually playing an A major. I showed you this voicing a little while ago. Our pinky is up here on the 5th fret of our E string playing an A note. It's a little hard to hear exactly what Robert Johnson is doing on the recording, but I do hear that high A ringing out. I can't really tell if there's other notes below it, but might as well go ahead and play them because it sounds great. So that's basically what we're doing at the beginning. So I'm playing the bass and the upper three strings at the same time. As we approach our D chord, in the 5th measure, we go to an A7. So I showed you this shape before. I'm barring across the 2nd fret on 3 strings, and then playing this G natural on my E string. So. This is a really fun lick. So I'm just holding on to this chord shape because I just think it's easier, and that way if you happen to hit another string, it'll still be in the chord. Just sliding the whole thing up from a half step down back to this A7 position. And I'm picking my B string as I slide, and then my E string when I land on the chord. Just like that. This is pretty fun because we're playing this slide on an upbeat, and then I'm playing the G on a downbeat, so the bass is underneath that note. There's no bass when I slide up. Just like that. Takes a little practice, Once you got it, it's really fun to do. So that's the first 4 measures of each verse. So here's those measures again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Sorry, that actually belongs in the 4 measures too, first 4 measures. All I'm doing here is again the same shape. I'm sliding it down a half step and back up, and I'm syncopating it. I'm playing those on an upbeat with my 3 fingers while I keep that steady 4 on the floor and the bass. Just like that. So, for real this time, the first 4 measures of each vocal verse. 2, 3, 4. I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Then we're going to D next. I'm going to play 2 different voicings on this D chord. The first one is this cowboy chord voicing that we talked about earlier. Then I'm going to slide up to here. I'm playing an A on my E string. I'm playing an F sharp on my B string. I'm playing the chord 7th. That's a C natural on my G string. Sort of barring across the 5th fret and then using my left hand ring finger on the B string. So keeping that steady 4 on the floor, going with the thumb and syncopating the top part. I'm playing on the downbeat, then I'm playing an upbeat. Definitely something you can vary and play around with these 2 voicings, but that's what I'm doing on the performance at the beginning of the video. So let's play the whole thing up to there. 2, 3, 4. I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Yes, and I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Then we go back to the A7 voicing that we talked about before, and I'm doing the same rhythm, playing on the downbeat and then an upbeat. One more lick on the A. On the recording, Robert Johnson does something, he kind of goes from open E to G sharp to A, so I'm trying to recreate that. That's what I'm doing until right before we get to the E. So again, the A. It's a little tricky to play at first. You've got to get your bass notes on the downbeats, and you've got to play some stuff with these 3 fingers on the upbeats. When you first try to do this, it's going to feel probably pretty awkward and pretty hard, and you might just really need to map out where the bass and where the upper strings play. But once you get it, it's pretty easy and really fun. Let's do the whole thing up to there. Then the next thing, we're going to go to an E7. I showed you earlier that I'm just doing this D7 voicing moved up a whole step and playing the open E string with my thumb for the bass, and then the D7, and I'm playing that same rhythm again, that downbeat with the upbeat. So that'll get us all the way to the turnaround. Here's the whole thing. I'm going to start my metronome. So this is the entire rhythm section with those licks I'm playing all the way up till the turnaround. 1, 2, 3, 4. I followed her. Sorry, that's not what I did. 1, 2, 3, 4. Followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Yes, and I followed her to the station, suitcase in my hand. Well, it's hard to tell, it's hard to tell, when all your love's in vain. That'll be the turnaround right there. Okay, let's get into that turnaround lick. You really already know it. It's basically the same thing we played in the intro. The only difference is what we play right before it. In the intro, you remember we had this. So the turnaround is just the same lick. That we already learned. The only difference is instead of playing this high A before we go to it, we're playing an open A and an open E before we get into this lick. But this part is exactly the same as we already learned for the intro. So the whole turnaround. Let me do it from the last 4 measures of the 12-bar blues form from the E7. 2, 3, 4. Then we'll be back at the top there on this A chord. One more time, same spot. 2, 3, 4. So now we've learned the whole song. I'm going to play it just a couple times through for you with my metronome. I'm going to play the intro. I'm going to play through the main chord progression twice with all the licks I showed you. And of course the turnaround. And then one more little thing is at the very end, I end it here. It's the same A7 voicing. It's the very beginning of the intro, same voicing. I just I play the open A with my thumb and I let it ring. I don't really mute it at the end because it sounds nice that way. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. And that's it. Robert Johnson's Love in Vain, a great blues song. Hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much.